You can eat what you believe is a perfectly healthy diet. You can avoid sugar. You can stay away from fast food. You can take your supplements every single morning without fail, and still feel inflamed, tired, foggy, stiff, and weaker with every passing year. And that's the most frustrating part. You're doing what you were told was right, yet your body keeps aging faster than it should. Your joints ache when you get out of bed. Your digestion feels unpredictable. Your energy disappears by mid-afternoon. Now let me ask you something important. What if one of the biggest hidden health risks for people over 60 isn't sugar, isn't red meat, isn't salt, but a grain you've been eating almost every day of your life? A grain doctors once praised. A grain that sits at the center of breakfast tables, lunch plates, and dinner menus. It shows up in bread, cereal, crackers, pasta, and even foods labeled whole, natural, or heart-healthy. This grain doesn't cause damage overnight. That's why it's so dangerous. It works slowly and silently, irritating your gut, fueling inflammation, weakening muscles, stiffening joints, clouding the brain, and accelerating aging at the cellular level year after year. Most people never suspect it. They blame age. They blame genetics. They think, this is just what getting older feels like. But it's not. And in just a moment, I'll reveal exactly what this grain is, why it becomes especially harmful after 60, and what you can eat instead to protect your brain, muscles, joints, and long-term longevity. Starting with your very next meal. As we age, something critical begins to change inside the body, and almost no one is properly warned about it. Digestion becomes less efficient. The gut lining thins, the immune system becomes more sensitive and reactive, and the body's ability to recover from daily inflammation drops sharply. This means your body stops forgiving certain foods. Meals that caused no problems in your 30s or 40s can suddenly leave you bloated, stiff, tired, or foggy after 60, not because you've done something wrong, but because your physiology has changed. Stomach acid naturally declines with age. Digestive enzymes are produced in smaller amounts. The gut barrier becomes more fragile and easier to irritate. And when that barrier is compromised, inflammation doesn't stay in the digestive system. It spreads throughout the entire body. This is why so many people over 60 say the same thing. I don't understand it. I've eaten this my whole life. Why does it bother me now? The answer is simple but rarely explained. Aging changes the rules. What once worked stops working, and foods that were once neutral or even encouraged can quietly become daily stressors. One of the biggest mistakes in modern nutrition is assuming that if a food is traditional, familiar, or widely accepted, it must be safe forever. The truth is, longevity requires adaptation, and certain common foods begin to trigger inflammation, joint pain, low energy, brain fog, and muscle loss as the body ages. Today, we're going to focus on one of the most overlooked examples, a common grain that silently undermines health after 60. It interferes with digestion, worsens joint stiffness, drains energy, clouds mental clarity, and accelerates muscle decline without most people ever making the connection. This conversation isn't about fear or restriction, it's about awareness. When you understand how this grain interacts with an aging body, you regain control. You can remove a constant source of internal stress and replace it with foods that support strength, clarity, and long-term vitality. And let me be very clear, this isn't about being perfect. It's about making one strategic change that produces disproportionate results. I've watched people in their 60s, 70s, and even 80s feel lighter, clearer, and more mobile in a matter of weeks. To understand why this happens, we need to look at the problem most people never think to connect to their plate. Let me tell you about Robert. He's 68 years old. He does what most doctors recommend. He walks every single day. He avoids fast food, rarely touches sweets. He takes his blood pressure medication and his multivitamin every morning without fail. On paper, Robert is doing everything right. From the outside, his lifestyle looks healthy, but inside his body, something wasn't working. He was bloated almost every day. His knees hurt the moment he got out of bed. His fingers felt stiff and swollen in the mornings. By early afternoon, his energy would crash so hard he felt like he needed to lie down. And what bothered him most wasn't the pain, it was the mental fog. He described it as thinking through a thick haze. Words didn't come as easily. Focus slipped away. He didn't feel sharp anymore, so he did what most people do. He went to his doctor, and the answer he heard was familiar. This is just aging. Joint pain is normal at your age. Digestion slows down. Fatigue happens as you get older. But here's the truth. Most people are never told. Aging itself does not cause inflammation. Chronic inflammation accelerates aging. Inflammation is not an inevitable part of getting older. It's a biological response. And in older adults, it's often fueled by something happening every single day. Something so common, it's almost invisible. One of the most powerful drivers of inflammation after 60 isn't lack of exercise. It isn't stress. It isn't even genetics. It's daily dietary irritation, especially from foods that repeatedly activate the immune system at a low level. This is where the biggest nutrition myth comes in. You've been told your entire life that whole grains are always healthy. That bread gives you energy. That cereal is a good breakfast. That grains are heart-healthy and safe for everyone. But the truth is far more nuanced, especially after 60. As the gut ages, it becomes more sensitive to specific proteins found in common grains. These proteins can irritate the intestinal lining, interfere with nutrient absorption, and quietly activate inflammatory pathways throughout the body. When this irritation happens day after day, the body never fully recovers. It stays locked in a low-grade inflammatory state. Joints ache. Muscles weaken faster than they should. The brain becomes less efficient, sleep becomes lighter and less restorative. And because this process is slow and subtle, most people never connect the dots. They don't blame the food they eat every morning. They blame age. This is exactly why eliminating one specific grain often leads to surprising improvements: less bloating, reduced joint stiffness, clearer thinking, deeper sleep, and more stable energy. To understand why this happens, we need to look deeper at what's really going on inside the aging gut and why this grain becomes a problem after 60. It's time to name it. The grain we're talking about today is wheat. Not just white bread or pastries, not just donuts or pizza, but modern wheat in all its forms. Whole wheat, multigrain, organic, sprouted, artisanal, and even products labeled ancient or heart-healthy. Here's the hidden truth almost no one explains. The wheat we eat today is not the same wheat your parents or grandparents grew up with. Over the past 50 to 70 years, wheat has been aggressively modified through selective breeding to increase yield, shelf life, and baking performance, not human digestibility. Modern wheat contains unusually high levels of specific proteins, especially gluten and gliadin. These proteins are difficult to break down, particularly in older adults whose stomach acid and digestive enzymes are already reduced. When these proteins aren't fully digested, they interact directly with the gut lining. In aging bodies, this can increase intestinal permeability, often referred to as a leaky gut. In simple terms, the barrier meant to protect you becomes porous. This allows inflammatory compounds to pass from the digestive tract into the bloodstream. And once they're in circulation, the immune system treats them as intruders. Even people who do not have celiac disease can experience this reaction. Multiple studies have shown that wheat proteins can trigger immune responses in people without any formal diagnosis. And here's the key point. The sensitivity increases with age as gut resilience and immune tolerance decline. Once these inflammatory signals escape the gut, they don't stay localized. They travel. They reach the joints, triggering stiffness and pain. They reach the brain, contributing to fog, slower processing, and poor focus. They reach the muscles, interfering with repair and strength. This is why so many people suffer from joint pain, fatigue, and cognitive decline without ever receiving a clear explanation. The immune system is being quietly activated day after day by a food it now struggles to tolerate. And here's what makes the situation even worse. Wheat-based foods spike blood sugar rapidly. After 60, insulin sensitivity naturally declines. So now the body is hit from two directions at once: immune activation and blood sugar stress. Over time, this double burden accelerates muscle loss, worsens arthritis, increases fat storage, and raises the risk of cognitive decline. The body stays stuck in a defensive state instead of a repair state. I've seen countless people remove wheat and experience changes they never thought possible. reduced swelling, calmer digestion, clearer thinking, more stable energy throughout the day. But simply removing wheat isn't enough. If you don't replace it correctly, you can end up tired, hungry, and undernourished. So now the real question becomes, what do you eat instead to support strength, clarity, and healthy aging? That's exactly what we'll cover next. So if modern wheat quietly pushes the body into inflammation after 60, the obvious question becomes, what do you eat instead? The goal isn't restriction. The goal is replacement. And the first replacement is one of the most powerful changes an older adult can make. Replace wheat-based breakfasts with protein-rich ones. Most people start their day with toast, cereal, bagels, or baked goods. These foods spike blood sugar, inflame the gut, and leave the body struggling to maintain energy. Protein does the opposite. Protein stabilizes blood sugar, reduces inflammatory signaling, and most importantly, preserves muscle. Eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, or even leftover fish from the night before provide the amino acids your aging muscles desperately need. This matters because after 60, muscle loss accelerates if the body doesn't receive the right signals early in the day. Protein provides that signal. It tells the body, maintain strength, preserve tissue, repair. One of the biggest mistakes people make is eating most of their protein at dinner. By then, the metabolic window has already passed. After 60, protein works best when consumed in the morning, especially at breakfast. Let me tell you about Margaret. She's a 62-year-old retired teacher who started her mornings with toast and jam for decades. When she replaced that breakfast with eggs and sautéed vegetables, the change surprised her. Within 3 weeks, her morning joint stiffness decreased. Her energy no longer collapsed in the afternoon, and for the first time in years, she felt steady throughout the day instead of riding a blood sugar roller coaster. The second part of the solution is choosing low-inflammatory carbohydrates instead of wheat. Foods like sweet potatoes, squash, quinoa, and even white rice are far easier for older adults to digest. They provide usable energy without irritating the gut lining or triggering immune reactions. These carbohydrates replenish glycogen without provoking inflammation, but only when eaten correctly. Portion control matters, and pairing them with protein and healthy fats is essential. The most common mistake people make is eating carbohydrates alone. When carbs aren't paired with protein, blood sugar rises too quickly, creating fatigue and inflammation. Protein slows absorption and keeps energy stable. The third and final piece of the solution is gut repair. When the gut lining is supported, sensitivity to foods decreases, and inflammation drops across the entire body. Fermented foods like yogurt, kefir, and sauerkraut help restore beneficial bacteria that strengthen the intestinal barrier. As the gut heals, people often notice improvements far beyond digestion. Joint pain eases, brain fog lifts, sleep becomes deeper, energy stabilizes. The biggest mistake here is inconsistency. Gut repair isn't something you do once a week. It requires daily input, small, consistent habits that rebuild resilience over time. When protein-rich mornings, low-inflammatory carbohydrates, and gut-supportive foods are combined, the body shifts out of constant irritation and into repair mode. And that's when real aging reversal begins. This is where most people go wrong. They understand the solution, but they keep repeating the habits that quietly undo all their progress. The first thing to stop immediately is wheat-based breakfasts. Toast, cereal, bagels, and breakfast pastries may seem harmless, but starting your day with wheat locks your body into inflammation for hours. Blood sugar spikes. The immune system activates. Energy crashes by midday, and instead of repairing overnight damage, your body spends the entire morning in defense mode. The second major mistake is replacing wheat with ultra-processed gluten-free products. Gluten-free does not mean healthy. Many of these foods are made with refined starches that spike blood sugar even faster than regular bread. For an aging body, this creates just as much stress, sometimes more. The gut remains irritated, energy remains unstable, and inflammation continues under a different name. The third thing to avoid is combining wheat with fats and sugars, bread with butter, pastries, pizza. These combinations are especially damaging for aging arteries, joints, and metabolic health. When wheat, fat, and sugar are eaten together, inflammation intensifies and blood sugar stays elevated longer. This accelerates joint degeneration and worsens stiffness over time. Another dangerous assumption is believing that moderation makes wheat harmless. For many adults over 60, sensitivity is no longer dose-dependent. Even small amounts can trigger inflammation that lasts for days. This is why people often say, "I only had a little, but I felt terrible afterward." Their body is no longer tolerant the way it once was. And finally, avoid eating wheat late at night. Digestion is weakest in the evening. Wheat consumed at night lingers in the gut, increases irritation, disrupts sleep, and prevents proper overnight repair. Poor sleep further worsens inflammation, creating a vicious cycle that accelerates aging from multiple directions. When these triggers are removed, something remarkable happens. The body finally stops defending itself all day long. Inflammation quiets down. Digestion becomes calmer. Joints move more freely. Energy stabilizes. And the body regains the ability to recover instead of constantly fighting. This is why removal is just as powerful as addition. And it leads us directly to the final piece: how to bring all of this together for lasting results. Let's bring this all together. The most important lesson to remember is this: aging well is not about piling on more supplements, powders, or pills. It's about removing the daily stressors that quietly accelerate decline year after year. For people over 60, modern wheat is one of the most common and most overlooked sources of chronic inflammation. It fuels joint pain, digestive distress, unstable energy, and brain fog, often without people ever realizing where the problem starts. When you remove wheat and replace it with protein-rich meals, low-inflammatory carbohydrates, and foods that support gut repair, you give your body something incredibly powerful: the right environment to heal itself. This is when inflammation begins to settle. Muscles preserve strength. Joints move more freely. Mental clarity improves, and energy becomes steadier instead of crashing throughout the day. Here's a simple bonus tip: remove wheat completely for just 30 days. No guessing, no, just a little. Pay attention to how your joints feel, how your digestion responds, how clearly you think, and how steady your energy becomes. Most people learn more about their body in those 30 days than they do from years of lab tests. Because your body always tells the truth, if you know how to listen. Now I want to hear from you. Which wheat-based food do you eat most often? Bread, pasta, cereal, crackers, or something else? Write it in the comments. And if this surprised you, make sure you don't miss the next video. I'll reveal the one so-called healthy cooking oil that quietly damages arteries after 60, and what to use instead to protect your heart, brain, and longevity. Subscribe now, because once you see what this oil does inside the body, you'll never look at your kitchen the same way again.